Where's my NBC? Are we good? Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to today's press conference. I'd also like to welcome our viewers on NBC Sports Bay Area, those also viewing on sfgiants.com, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and to our listeners on KMBR. With us today, we have Giants President of Baseball Operations, Farhan Zaidi. We have Scott Harris, Giants General Manager, and our next manager of the San Francisco Giants, Gabe Kapler. We're going to have the jersey and hat presentation first. Then we'll have statements from everyone, followed by Q&A. And when we do Q&A, if you can please use the microphone and introduce yourself. So with that, go ahead, Farhan.
You take the hat.
Thank you. I always feel much more confident in a jersey and a hat than I do a blazer, so this is really nice to put this on. Sure.
Jason Dane, does he have the right bend on the bill up here? So we're just going to keep doing this every 2 days and see how many people we can fit up here on the podium. That's good. That's going to be our plan. Thank you guys for all being here today. Really excited to be announcing Gabe Kapler as our next manager here in San Francisco. It's been a really long process. It's been a long and thorough process. I'd really set the goal of naming a manager while I was still 42 years old, and missed that cutoff by a couple of days. But we took the responsibility of choosing our next manager seriously, and we had a terrific pool of candidates. It was really an honor and privilege to get to know the different candidates that we interviewed. We did multiple rounds. We had the candidates meet with a wide spectrum of people in the organization, not just baseball operations, but people on the business side. Had some conversations with players and members of the staff, and really wanted to conduct this as a collaborative process. I want to thank all of the candidates that participated. There are a lot of guys that I think deserve the opportunity to manage one day, and I hope it happens soon for them. That was one thing that I felt really strongly about as we went through this. As I said at my end-of-season press conference, when we thought about what we really wanted in our next manager, I mentioned that we wanted to find somebody who could create strong relationships with players and with the front office. And we felt like if we had those two things, that would be the foundation for a really strong and positive relationship and somebody who could really take this organization forward. And as we went through the process and interviewed candidates, it became clear to us as a group that Gabe Kapler was the right guy for the job. And as part of that process, we reached out to people in the Phillies organization, and frankly, they reached out to us as well to offer their endorsement and support. That was one thing that was very clear to us, that in terms of developing those relationships with both the players and with the front office, that was something that Gabe did exceptionally well with the Phillies, and that was coming directly from the source. So that was a very pivotal and valuable piece of the puzzle for us as we went through this. I obviously have some experience with Gabe. We worked together in Los Angeles. He was the farm director there. I think that's the most difficult job in baseball. It's the most difficult job in baseball because organizations are increasingly putting a lot of emphasis on player development. It's an area where I think teams view the potential to create a competitive advantage and a sustainable winner. And in his role there, he not only did that, but created something that was sustainable even when he left. He hired staff and he put processes in place that I think are a big part of why that farm system operates as effectively and is as productive for that organization as it is today. We're in a situation, and we've talked about it a lot, where we're an organization in transition. And development is going to be a key for us. It's going to be a key for us not just at the minor league level, but at the major league level. And as we went through the process and thought about Gabe's candidacy and qualifications, we thought he was someone that, beyond building those relationships that I talked about, would also be able to focus on the development that we think we're going to need to be successful going forward. I want to touch on the incidents in LA that have been out there in the public sphere and talked about over the last couple of weeks. I was obviously there at the time, and I just want to state a couple of things for the record. What we talk about here, Gabe does have sort of supporting documentation for, and these are things that were corroborated by MLB's investigation, which was part of the process. Number one, Gabe never tried to hide anything. The incidents that happened, he reported up the chain of command within baseball operations. The baseball operations group referred him to legal counsel in LA, and everything we did from that point forward was done collectively as an organization. Secondly, in those cases, I think it's important to note that, again, as an organization and in concert with legal counsel, we did approach the victims and ask about reporting these incidents to the police, and we respected the victims' wishes with whatever they decided to do in that case. But I just feel very strongly about stating that there was never an attempt to cover anything up. At the same time, for both Gabe and myself, we have used this process to reach out to advocates and people in the community that are experts in this field and try to understand from their perspective how they viewed those events. And I think we've both come to realize that there were things we could have done better. And in that regard, I would point to a couple of things in particular. One is we did not seek their advice. I mean, people that we have spoken to over the last couple of weeks, we did not go to experts in this field and leaders in this field and ask them how we should handle those situations. I think we viewed it as situations where as long as there was internal reporting, which there was, and as long as we followed legal advice, which we did, and offered the ability to go to the police and assist in that process, that was what we did. And in talking to members of the community, we've realized that that was an inadequate response. And what we've come to realize is not only should we have sought help from people who were experts in the field, but we should not have stopped with the notion of reporting these incidents to the police. I think what we've come to understand is this is not a situation where these incidents and what you do afterwards are just about protecting victims, but really about supporting. And I don't think we did enough in that regard. And I've had to reflect on that, and I'm truly sorry that I didn't do more. And I'll let Gabe speak to that on his part as well. I just want to close by saying that we all took the responsibility of choosing our next manager very seriously, and a big part of that is the character of the person. This is not a job that's just about the X's and O's. This is about somebody who's going to be an ambassador to the community, a leader of the organization. And based on my personal experience with Gabe, I feel very strongly he can be that kind of person and leader for us. I think that's what we as an organization collectively came to understand through this process. And I'll let him speak more to that. But he's somebody that I believe in, that we believe in, that we're really excited to get out in the community and have our fans and other people in the community who care about this organization get to know. Because when they get to know Gabe Kapler, I'm just very confident and excited that it's going to be the start of a tremendous partnership, and that he's going to lead us into the future in a way that our fans and our organization can be really proud of. So that's all I had. I want to pass it over to Scott for his comments.
Thanks, Farhan. The one point I wanted to add is I believe I have a unique perspective entering this process, both because I entered the process a couple days ago and also because I don't have a prior working relationship with Gabe. So the most important part of my process in evaluating his candidacy was leaning on the references that I got from people I trust in the game, leaning on the references I got from people who saw Gabe perform as a manager and as a player. And Farhan and I were very impressed by the reference checks that we did around the game. Many players, coaches, and executives reached out to us, and they spoke glowingly about Gabe's work ethic, about his growth mindset, about his commitment to making players better, and about his ability to create culture at the major league level that promotes and inspires development. And that's very hard to find in this game today. So those references for us were extremely valuable and extremely persuasive as we enter the process and we reached our decision.
So first, I'd like to say thank you to Farhan, to Scott for identifying some of the characteristics that I believe in as well. I think I can bring the things that Scott and Far are mentioning. I'll also say this, that I think we all want to come to work to be inspired, and we all want to come to work to inspire other people. And as part of this vetting process that goes on in a managerial search, we're doing the same the other way. So I have the experience with Farhan. I know that what Farhan stands for, his character, the things that he thinks are important are also important to me, and those things are diversity and equality in the workplace. And I'll get into where this comes from me. It comes from my mom and my dad, and just looking out right now and seeing my two sons here, I'm pretty confident that they would say that those are things that are promoted in my house and in their house growing up. And then as it relates to Scott, I learned a lot about Scott as well. And again, wanting to come to work to be inspired and to inspire, I heard the same things about Scott and his character and his level of integrity. So the people that are sitting up here today, I think we all believe in one another, and we believe in the character, and that's a really important place to start. So I mentioned my mom and dad. They weren't able to be here today, but I leaned on my mom pretty heavily through this process, and for pretty obvious reasons. I think if I could go back and do some of the Dodgers stuff different, I probably would have called my mom and asked her a few more questions about which steps to take. And to Farhan's point, figuring out ways to support even better. And I think this is the right time to say that I'm sorry that I didn't make all the right moves. Everything that I did, I acted on from a place of goodness and from my heart and wanting to do the right thing, but I was naive. I was in over my skis and trying to do things on my own when it was very clear that I needed counsel, and I needed counsel from people like I've met in this community over the course of the last 2 weeks. And going forward, I would be seeking out that counsel. I mean, the counsel that my mom gave me over the course of the last 2 weeks was really meaningful to me. And so seeking out the advice of experts in these types of situations going forward is an adjustment that I would immediately make. Chase and Dane, thank you for being here. They missed school, and Dane's getting ready for his next playoff game in high school football, and Chase is missing a day at UCLA for this. So I had to say, like, looking out and seeing their two faces puts me at ease in a way that I wasn't at ease earlier in the day. Love you both, and I'm really glad you're here today. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the Phillies front office. They gave me my first shot to manage, and that didn't lead to the outcomes that any of us expected, but I think the most important thing that we can do in baseball is develop relationships, maintain relationships, and nurture those relationships. And the relationships that I developed with the people in Philadelphia, the front office in Philadelphia, are going to be long-lasting. They're not going to stop here. Again, want to just take a moment to acknowledge Farhan and Scott for the faith that they're demonstrating in me by giving me this jersey and this San Francisco Giants baseball cap that I'm very, very proud to be wearing right now. also want to acknowledge Rob and Larry, who are also here today, and the entire Giants organization for putting that trust in me. I'm going to work tirelessly to reward that faith and this opportunity. Farhan mentioned it earlier today. I'm pretty humbled by the fact that there are only 30 of these jobs. And I'm getting a job very quickly after having some, pretty public issues and some things in Philadelphia that didn't go according to plan. And I don't take that lightly. And through the course of this process, I've gotten to know a lot of great people in and outside of the organization that I know are going to be helpful in me learning from the mistakes that I made in Philadelphia and applying them here in San Francisco. The first that stands out to me is Bruce Bochy. And as I went through this process, I had the opportunity to spend a couple of hours with Boch. And it is going to be impossible for me to fill Bruce Bochy's shoes. It's not something that I'm going to set out to try to do. He's a Hall of Fame manager, beloved in this city and across baseball for so many totally appropriate reasons. One of the things that we talked about in our conversation was his second time managing was better than his first time, and he made a lot of adjustments along the way. And I could look for cues. One of the things that I'm going to set out to do is spend a lot of time with Boch and learning as much as I can about the ways that the things that he learned, and that's one of my major initiatives. I think one of the things that I personally learned in my time in Philadelphia is how to blend the information that we have at our fingertips as decision makers in this sport with some of the confidence building that goes on with our players. And very specifically, sometimes the smallest strategic in-game decision or baseball decision doesn't trump instilling a lot of confidence in a player that has to go up into the batter's box and have that confidence so that he can get off his athletic swing, or the pitcher on the mound that can deliver his best pitch and do so fluidly without maybe being bogged down by some of the numbers and some of that information. So not saying that one way or the other is more appropriate, but I do think that one of the things I learned is how to blend those things well to inspire the confidence of as many players as possible. Speaking of players, Buster is another guy that I was able to get to know during this process. We spent some time together as well. And I found Buster to be very attentive, very aware. And as I think ahead of how I'm going to make an impact in this clubhouse, I'm going to lean heavily on Buster because, from Boch to Buster to some of the other players in the clubhouse, nobody has a better perspective about what this clubhouse needs and what is going to create energy and enthusiasm and adjustments and accountability in this clubhouse like Buster does. Coaches matter too. And one of the things that I'm most excited and passionate about is hiring a top of the charts staff to lead this organization that I can lean on and give a lot of responsibility to, so I can be better equipped to sit down and have conversations with our players. And Ron Wotus is going to be our third base coach in 2020, and very honored, very excited about working with Woe, and specifically his reputation is stellar. He's been in this city forever. And again, as I look for places to get perspective, and part of the first couple of months of entering an organization as a manager is going on a listening tour. And that listening tour includes just not saying as much, but really asking a lot of questions. So something that I plan to do with Woe. I wanted to touch on a little bit why I'm really excited about coming into the San Francisco Giants organization, and very specifically the city of San Francisco. I got a text early this morning from a former teammate of mine who remembered back to the mid 2000s, and me saying I was really excited about going to San Francisco because I connect with the city, I connect with the food, I connect with the opportunity to walk the city, which is something that I share in common with Boch. And I can tell you that over the last couple of days, I've walked from the ballpark to Nob Hill to the financial district and everywhere in between, stopped in cafes, had cups of coffee, got great meals, and really was witness to what I believe to be one of the most diverse and accepting cities on the planet. And that probably excites me more than anything else about coming to San Francisco. And that brings me back to my mom and my dad and my two sons. my mom and my dad were both civil rights activists. They were both very heavily involved in social justice and social change, and those were values that were instilled in me from a very young age. They're both educators, and what the city of San Francisco stands for, what my mom and dad stand for, and what I believe I stood for, well, for Chase and Dane, is equality, diversity, and caring a great deal about community, a place that I have no doubt that I will be able to make an impact, strictly because I care enough to do it. And one of the things that's come up with some of the issues from the Dodgers is using this as an opportunity. It's a moment that can create a movement. And from my perspective, that means talking about the issues, talking about them openly, not shying away from them. And specifically, when I get in front of Buster and when Woe gets in front of our team, devoting ourselves and dedicating ourselves to first going out and getting educated ourselves, but then educating our players. And as we educate our players, making that as important as the baseball work that they're doing. I think Farhan will tell you that in Los Angeles, one of the things that I felt very strongly about was building people first and baseball players second. I maintain that to this day, and I don't think that I'm going to convince you that that's who I am in this press conference. But I think that over the course of my time in Los Angeles and over the course of my time in Philadelphia, people will say that I cared about people first. And I believe that I'll be able to demonstrate. I don't expect to gain your trust right now in this press conference, but know that over the course of time, I'm going to be able to do that. Very excited about foundation building. I know that the fan base in San Francisco is not interested in winning once and then going away. Building a foundation that can create a sustainable winning culture, year in, year out, competing for National League West titles is something that I'm very excited about. Part of the reason I was so attracted to this job is because I trust Far and I trust Scott and their ability to build not just a major league club through going out and acquiring free agents, but a sustainable foundation. I'm really excited about being a part of that. Everybody knows the storied history of this franchise, and I know oftentimes that we talk through the great players. And one person that comes to mind for me is Will Clark. And the reason Will comes to mind is because when I was playing for the Texas Rangers in the early 2000s, I got to live in Will's house. And as a part of living he rented his house to me, just to be very clear. And this is when Chase was a baby, and thinking back to that time, I did a lot of research on Will the Thrill, and a lot of research on that sweet stroke and what he meant to the city of San Francisco. But just ending this on as light a note as possible. Like, I'm also excited about the little things that make this game fun. Panda costumes and baby giraffes and celebrating in this ballpark with all of the fans of San Francisco. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, we're going to open it up to questions. We have a couple of microphones. Sorry. Just remember to introduce yourself.
Ann Killian, San Francisco Chronicle. Farhan, just to clarify, in the incidents back in 2015, were you on the email chains and part of the decision-making process with the Dodgers? And then I have a follow-up question.
Okay. Yeah, I was aware of the incident as it happened and as Gabe reported up the chain.
Both incidents?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when you were interviewed with the Giants, did those come up?
I don't believe they did, no.
Okay. As you know, the fan base is pretty fractured at this point, has been disappointed for a number of reasons. And I'm just wondering about your decision-making. You had a number of candidates, as you said, they were all qualified, yet you decided to hire the guy who has been described as polarizing, a lightning rod, who comes with a lot of baggage. People deserve second chances, but this is a pretty, one of the crown jewels of Major League Baseball, this job. I'm just curious about why you feel that this is a way to rebuild the connection with the fans.
Look, that's a great question, and I felt and we felt like it was our responsibility to select the person who was right for the job, and we've talked about some of the reasons why those were what we were looking for and why we felt like Gabe was the right person for that. So I think you're asking about a certain set of perception issues that were out there, and I think for us, it was a question of whether we were going to judge someone based on some of those perception issues or what we knew to be true, and by our firsthand experience, by the interview process, by references that we checked, and ultimately we decided that was what was important. And I think that was because we recognized the gravity of the job that we were going to be interviewing for and filling, and how impactful this job can potentially be.
Hey, Farhan. Phil Barber, Santa Rosa Press, Democrat. You knew this hiring was likely to be controversial. You've discussed that to some extent already. Was there a greater vetting process for Gabe than there was for other candidates? If so, what generally was that, and did it affect the timeline of this hire?
Yeah, it did not affect the timeline because we were doing a lot of things in parallel, including interviewing GM candidates and hiring Scott. There was a greater vetting process because of some of the points that Ann raised, and like you said, some of what's been out there. As I mentioned, we talked a lot about the conversations we've had with people in the community. I don't want to get into more details about the identities of those people out of respect for their confidentiality, but they were valuable resources for us. And one of the things that came out of those conversations was that they're really not that interested in the he said, she said of what did happen or what didn't happen. And I felt like I needed to clear the record a little bit up here about some of what's been out there and some of what I believe, not just what I believe to be true, but what I know to be true and what was corroborated by MLB's investigation. But in those conversations, they made it very clear that what they're interested in is what we learned and what we plan to do going forward. And that's something that's really come out of this process for myself, for the organization, and I think for Gabe as well, that we need to do better in this area. I mean, we're talking about incident management and not really talking about why these incidents happen in the first place. And, you know, as I think back to not just the past year, but my 15 years in baseball, I realize I haven't done enough. I haven't done enough on the side of preventing those things from happening at all, rather than what the right thing is and what the right protocol is for how to handle them. And that's something that I pledge, and we as an organization pledge to be much more proactive and aggressive about going forward. And whether or not we hired Gabe, that was something that I've gotten out of this process. And for me, you know, that includes greater education at the minor league level. I mean, there are MLB guidelines for a certain education and training that has to be done, but clearly it's not enough because these things are still happening. And as we look at it, I mean, that's going to be something that we're going to invest a lot of time and energy in going forward. It's a responsibility that we all take seriously. You know, we know that we're going to be on notice. And we want to be on notice because this is something that we want to be better at, and that I think we as an industry and a sport have to be better at. And, you know, like Gabe talked about, you know, we want to use this as an impetus for that kind of change, and I'm very committed to doing my part to making that happen.
Hi, Gabe. Janie McCauley from Associated Press.
Jamie.
How will you go maybe above and beyond to gain that trust of the fan base? You said it may not happen today or tomorrow, but are there things you can do, you know, proactively right now to start gaining the trust of everybody to make that process happen fast?
I think so. I think one of the things that comes to mind immediately is having these harder conversations with players that you might not have in the first couple of conversations if some of these issues didn't exist. So by way of example, if I go out and I talk to Tyler Beatty, I talk to Buster, I talk to Brandon Crawford or Brandon Belt, normally that first conversation would entail a lot of baseball stuff. But maybe the way to handle this, and I actually feel pretty strongly about it, is to bring these issues up in the first conversation and talk about what we're going to stand for as Giants. Farhan mentioned it, like these are problems in Major League Baseball clubhouses. And Far mentioned that he hadn't done enough. I know he's speaking for himself personally, but I think I certainly haven't done enough. And the industry hasn't done enough. And I think it takes people willing to have those first conversations with players about what's important to us and what we're going to stand for in our clubhouse. And I think the way that I can make the biggest impact immediately is to talk about these things openly with our players and perhaps inspire them to start talking about them as well.
Hey, Gabe. Susan Slesser from the San Francisco Chronicle.
Hi, Susan.
You mentioned that you felt like you learned a lot in your first job with the Phillies. What specifically would you say that you learned there that you can bring here? And then I have a quick follow-up when you answer.
Okay. So I mentioned it a little bit as I talked for probably too long, but I think the thing that I learned most, and it was pretty abrupt, was in my first year as a Phillies manager in 2018, I thought a lot about every little strategic edge, every little strategic advantage, and sometimes at the expense of some of that confidence that we've talked about. And my biggest learn was sometimes the confidence, a confident player is a better baseball player, and that outweighs the strategic advantage you get of calling just the right pitch at the right time. I'll use a pitcher analogy. If all of the information says that the curveball is the best pitch in a particular situation, but that pitcher does not want to throw that pitch, you don't force him to throw that pitch. You let him throw a different pitch with a lot of conviction, with a lot of energy and a lot of confidence. And maybe that's the best pitch in the moment. So probably my biggest learn is how to blend those two things, and not to back down because a player feels like, oh, I'm going to feel more comfortable if I deliver the fastball here. You still have to have the conversation. You still have to have it in a pretty strong way. But at the same time, like there has to be a bit of a give and take there. And then if we walk out of the room, the player and myself walk out of the room, and he feels like the best pitch to deliver in that situation, of course I'm using this just as an example, then he delivers the pitch that he feels most confident in.
What do you feel are potentially the biggest challenges here with, obviously the roster will change, but with what you're working with now, you talk about building a foundation. What do you see kind of as the bigger challenges as you go into next season?
I think the biggest challenge is creating some structure and accountability. And again, I'm going to circle back because I really do believe this. Probably have to do a lot more listening than I do talking at first. So it's polling the players on our team and asking them about what type of structure they need. Give you an example of what that might look like. After the 2018 season, we brought a lot of our star players together in Philadelphia up into a room in Clearwater. And this was overlooking the field, and we discussed some of the policies and the boundaries that were going to be in place for the 2019 season. And those things were related to like what time guys needed to be on the line, what time they needed to be out for a stretch. Should we have a group stretch, or should it be more an individualized program? And by allowing the players a voice in that conversation, and by asking for their opinion on what that structure and what that accountability should look like, they become invested in a way that they hold each other accountable. In every good clubhouse that I've ever been a part of, from the 2004 Boston Red Sox to a playoff team that I was on in 2008 with the Milwaukee Brewers, to some of the things that I saw in Los Angeles while I was there, players have to be a part of that raising the bar. They have to be a part of that accountability that takes place. And they have to be active participants in the conversation. And so those are some of the things that I'll focus on.
Tim Kawakami, The Athletic. Gabe, I imagine you've seen social media or some of the reaction in the media also to this hire, not the most popular hire ever, following Bruce Bochy, as you mentioned, and great deal of this press conference is dealing with incidents in the past and trying to discuss them through. And in Philadelphia, even before this, you certainly were a polarizing figure. Do you feel like in any way you're starting in a little bit of a hole here? Does that matter to you?
Well, first of all, Tim, thank you. I think it's a good question. The answer to your question is yes, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a hole. And yes, that means something to me. And I think I would probably just use it as an opportunity to roll up my sleeves a little bit more, to dig in a little bit more, to really find out what the issues are, to find out why I have had some of those issues and why so far I have not been a popular hire. And then be responsive to those things. All right? I don't think I know everything. I don't think that I've made every perfect step. I made a lot of mistakes. But I think one of the things that you'll find out about me is that I'm pretty good at making adjustments. So when I find out there's a reason that maybe this isn't the most popular hire. I want to know what those reasons are, and I want to get better at them. And so I just dig in and roll up my sleeves and get to work.
Hi, Gabe. Carlos Ramirez, Telemundo and NBC Bay Area. Welcome to San Francisco and the
Thanks,
Bay Area.
Carlos.
What excites you about this job, and what scares you about it?
One of the things that excites me about it is, and I'm going to use the conversation that I had with the Chicago Cubs as part of their managerial search, and use that as contrast for the San Francisco Giants managerial search. Chicago is such an awesome place from a city perspective, and also they have a pretty turnkey operation going and have just done a tremendous job of building that foundation that I discussed. There's something really enticing and exciting about getting in and being a part of building that foundation. And I think in San Francisco, there's been a lot of work done already by far, and there's been a lot of work done by people in previous regimes, front office, R&D, and a lot of great work. But it does feel a bit more like a blank slate. And for creative people and creative people in baseball in particular, that's super exciting. What scares me about it? A lot of things that scare me about it. First, like it's very difficult to come into a situation where you're having to fill the shoes of a superstar manager. It's like being the rookie that comes after the Hall of Famer player at your position retires. I'll give you an example. A little bit different, but I think they're somewhat analogous. When I came up with the Detroit Tigers in the late 1990s, and I got to Tiger Stadium, the old Tiger Stadium with the wire mesh lockers, and in my locker was a number 23 jersey, and that number 23 jersey was Kirk Gibson's, and I hadn't done anything in the game, but that was the number that they gave me, and I always felt like fairly small next to Kirk Gibson, both actually in stature, but also as a player. He was an excellent baseball player. So, yeah, I felt a little bit intimidated by that, and I could say pretty openly that there's some intimidation coming in with, like Tim mentioned, some perceptions out there that I have to account for, and having to be like the follow to a wonderful man and a wonderful manager in Bruce Bochy.
Hey, Gabe and Farhan. Mark Sanchez from CanBR. Going back to the 2015 incidents, you said you sought out, or you should have sought out, experts' opinions on what to do. What did they tell you should have done next? Like what was the next step that you should have done?
You want me to take it?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll add.
Sure. I think the first step is to ask more questions. Openly and directly, I wasn't prepared to facilitate anything. I wasn't prepared to be as supportive to the victims as I could have been. The only way for me to prepare would have been to ask for the counsel of experts in the field. And what that counsel probably would have been, and again, this is a little bit of speculation, but I'm guessing it would have been to step aside and let people who are much more equipped to handle these situations handle them. And I, like I said, I naively and perhaps even arrogantly thought that I could be impactful and help. And I was just over my skis. I didn't do as good a job as I could have, and now I know that the best action steps for me to take would have been to seek out the counsel and the expert opinion of a lot of people who are devoted to these issues. And I think that would have been the counsel that I would have gotten, was to do more of that.
Yeah, I would just add that when that 2015 incident took place, the MLB protocol wasn't in place. That was still a time when organizations were trying, whose recourse was to handle it internally the best they could. And I think it's been a really important and valuable step that protocol is in place now, because MLB is able to provide the kind of support and expertise that we didn't have or we didn't seek out at the time. So I would just echo what Gabe said, that involving people who are better equipped, who have experience in these areas, rather than just making inferences about what the right thing or appropriate thing is to do. That's what's come out of the conversations for us over the last couple weeks. And again, I would just add, the notion of support goes way beyond asking whether things should be reported to the police. And I think we viewed that as very one-dimensionally. And, I know and we know now that was wrong. And, it's been valuable for me to go through the last couple weeks to learn that and understand it. And it's going to drive my behavior and our organization's behavior going forward.
Hello, Gabe. Chris Haft from MLB.com. Way back there.
Hey, Chris.
Hey. If I read baseballreference.com correctly, you were a 57th round draft pick?
Yes.
How did that...
Thank you for reminding me.
Well, I'm just wondering how that affected your outlook and approach to
Sure.
the game. I got one follow-up, a quick one after
Sure.
that.
Well, I can tell you this. When I was drafted, I didn't know I had been drafted. So I was at a scout league game at University of Santa Barbara, and I think it was like maybe 48 hours after the draft had gone by, and I thought I didn't get drafted. And there was the scout who was putting on the event asked me, like, was I planning on signing? I said nobody even called me to let me know I got drafted. So I think that experience of kind of feeling like I was forgotten shaped how I work in baseball, which is like, I better work really hard because I'm not that talented. And so, without that talent, I just feel like I have to out hustle, I have to outwork, I have to out study. And I still carry that with me to this day.
Also, you played for a World Series winner, and you've played for 90-plus lost teams. How does that spectrum of experience affect you or help you?
Well, I can tell you that my experience with the 2004 Boston Red Sox taught me that a team that spends time together in the clubhouse is a real separator. A team that spends time together off the field is a real separator. And I can tell you that in 2019 with the Phillies, one of the reasons I think we had an extremely tight clubhouse all the way through the end, even with some of our losing, was that players supported each other. Like, I can tell you numerous times walking through that clubhouse, seeing 5, 6, 7 guys sitting around a locker after a game, having a beer, or just talking. And like those guys really sticking up for each other, fighting for each other on the field. And then them standing up to me about other players. Hey, like coming into my office, like, here's what's happening with this guy, Cap. Like, we should probably pay some attention to that. And that was a result of those conversations that were happening in the clubhouse. So, and I can say that was very similar to the 2004 Boston Red Sox and some of the other playoff teams that I was a part of. I'll also say that some of those teams that lost a lot of games weren't all that talented, and I think that's a pretty big determining factor as well. Particularly the late '90s Detroit Tigers. We just didn't have many good players. It's no disrespect to anybody there, but.
Gabe, Kerry Crowley of the Bay Area News Group. Understanding some of the concerns of the fan base and even some of the concerns that you may have coming into this job, how will you define success from a cultural standpoint in your first year?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. From a cultural standpoint, I would define success as players having the opportunity to be themselves, show up at the ballpark as they are, feel like they can express themselves as unique and diverse individuals in a clubhouse, and then creating a challenging environment where players also hold each other accountable. So like it can't be just, hey, everybody is comfortable in their own skin and they're comfortable being themselves. There has to be an accountability that comes along with that. So that accountability is, okay, great, you're comfortable with who you are and being yourself. Now, how do you show up as a teammate? And if players are doing two things, number one, they're comfortable being themselves without being hammered down for what makes them unique and individuals. And also there is a culture of accountability after the 2020 season, a culture of accountability and structure. I will consider that part to be a success, the cultural part.
Ann Killian with the San Francisco Chronicle. Gabe, can you explain how you think your working relationship is going to be? I think there's the impression that Farhan puts together the team, Scott might hand you the lineup before the game, and then that maybe you're a bit of a puppet to them. How do you describe, or how do you envision how this working relationship is going to be in this new age?
Well, I would say this, like, I think people have gotten to know me fairly well. I don't know that I would fall into, well, let me take a step back. I know Farhan very well. I know Scott a little less well, but I do know through the process a little bit about what Scott stands for. And I think both Farhan and Scott believe in a structure where there's debate and healthy debate about what should happen on the field. And I think that, both of these guys know that I have a fairly strong personality as well. And I know the working structure here. I know that I work for Farhan, and then I work for Scott, and I work for the San Francisco Giants. But I also have very strong opinions. And I'm not uncomfortable expressing those opinions. And I'm not uncomfortable in a debate situation. And I think that knowing Farhan and knowing Scott, they don't just encourage that, but they celebrate it.
Steve Berman, The Athletic. Farhan, you mentioned earlier today and during this press conference that there's some facts that you guys know and also that were corroborated by investigation by MLB. Mainly this whole sort of controversy, if you want to call it, started because of an article in the Washington Post. So the first part of my question is there anything about that story that you guys dispute? And then you've talked a lot about seeking counsel. It seems like you were really depending on legal counsel, and you feel like they should shoulder some more of the blame that is kind of going toward you guys right now.
Well, I really just want to speak for myself, and I know Gabe wants to speak for himself, and it's important for me, and it's been an important part of this process for me to take accountability. To Ann's point, that I was aware of what was happening, and I thought that the way we handled it was appropriate and enough, and I know now that it wasn't. And so I can just speak for myself on that. Gabe does have a lot of documentation and support for what we've talked about in terms of, the fact that he was transparent, reporting things up through the organization. Also that we did offer to go to the police or assist in helping to go to the police. And I'm not sure those facts were made very clear in those articles. There are also more details that I don't think it's appropriate getting into now, but we're happy to talk about offline. And I think Gabe would very much look forward to clearing the record about what was in those articles and what we know to be different and what we can support with documentation. So I would welcome us doing that offline. I don't know if you want to add anything.
The only thing I'd add is to echo the sentiment of accountability. And I'll speak for myself as well. I don't think that I did enough. And we've talked about some of the ways that I could have been better in those situations. I have a lot of remorse for that. I wish I would have been more informed. I wish I would have gotten more informed. And I take responsibility for not taking those steps. I don't blame. You kind of asked the question about legal counsel. Like, my responsibility in the issue was my responsibility in the issue, and that was to ask more questions. It was to get more counsel. It was to not naively think that I was in a position where I could help in the specific ways that came up in that article.
Alex Pavlich, NBC Sports Bay Area. For both of you guys, you had an opportunity to potentially do this in Los Angeles, and Dave Roberts got that job. How was this process different the second time around? And Farhan, did you always kind of view Gabe as somebody who you might give a second shot one day?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to point out that until October 8th or 10th, we didn't know that Gabe was going to be on the market. So it was certainly not something that was planned much in advance of knowing when he was ultimately a candidate. But, I can speak to, my involvement in the process in LA. And as you mentioned, Dave, who's had an unbelievable tenure as the manager of the Dodgers and has done a lot of great things there, and I think has proven to be a tremendous hire for that organization. And Gabe were the two finalists. And in all candor, I think one of the questions we had was who was going to be the best leader at the time for that clubhouse. And on the one hand, I think Doc has proven himself to be, a very worthy choice and the right choice. But I think in that process, we might have underestimated Gabe's leadership abilities in the clubhouse. And that's one reason we really dug into his experience in Philadelphia and sought to get references, talk to players and staff there. And I have to say, I was a little bit overwhelmed by the unsolicited texts and phone calls I got from players and staff in Philly supporting his candidacy here and talking about how well respected and liked he was in the Philadelphia clubhouse. So obviously the team didn't live up to expectations and they felt like they needed to make a change. But you know, I think he's a much better candidate to lead a team and be a major league manager now than he was when we evaluated him in Los Angeles, and then even when he began his managerial tenure in Philadelphia. And that's kind of been a theme of ours through this process, is having a growth mindset and getting better at the job. And I think he's done that and will continue to do it.
Hi, Gabe. Mark Willard, KMBR. With the pushback being expressed by some of the fan base, I wonder if you feel intense pressure to produce excitement and wins right out of the gate, and how realistic do you think that is based on the transitional nature of the franchise that Farhan has discussed?
First of all, I think pressure is always a good thing. And I guess part of what I learned in Boston is that the brightest lights can sometimes bring out the best performance. And I see that, like, my experience in Philadelphia, which is there's quite a bit of pressure for any number of reasons in Philadelphia, and knowing that there's going to be a similar kind of pressure here in San Francisco, I see as a really good thing and an inspiring thing. As it relates to our ability to win, and I think that's what you're asking about, like on a more short-term basis. Look, like every year there are teams that go to the postseason and go deep into the postseason that some people thought were going to be very successful, and others maybe, didn't think were going to be particularly successful. My personal feeling is my job is to take the 25 guys plus another 10, 15 plus, and put them in the best positions to succeed every single day, and that will give us our best chance to win a lot of baseball games. I believe in that as a very realistic possibility in 2020 with the San Francisco Giants. I wouldn't be here if I didn't.
You should know we used 64 players last year. So it's going to be more than 25 plus 10.
Thanks, Stacy. Brian Murphy, KMBR. He does nights, I do mornings. So for your listening pleasure. I think most everybody's happy to see Ron Wotus here. He's universally beloved in this building, which leads us to the staff. Pitching coach, hitting coach. First, everything.
Sure.
We know nothing about your staff. It's going to tell us a lot about you and who's making the call. Give us your roadmap for our staff.
Let me answer the second question first, which is who's making the call. And obviously I will defer to Farhan and Scott here, but I'll say this. In every good organization that I've been a part of, both in baseball and outside of baseball, the best decisions are made collaboratively. And I always want to know what I'm missing, what I'm not seeing, what the experience of the people around me can offer. So I guess the decisions will likely be made collaboratively. The first part of the question is, this is an area that I'm most excited about. Farhan mentioned the farm system that we together worked on in Los Angeles and what that produced. And from a staff perspective, I think it produced a lot of major league coaches. I think it produced a lot of cultural contributors, a lot of people, human beings that I'm pretty proud of to this day. The staff in Philadelphia, I love that group, and most of them are still intact and are going to be still continuing to work in Philadelphia. And here, I'm most passionate about building a staff that works as a team and that doesn't just accept other people into their space, but actually invites other people and wants other people in their space. And I'll give you an example. I would like to have our coaches come into my office after games and challenge my in-game decisions. And yeah, definitely. Whoa. And any other coach. I just don't believe in getting the best out of people who feel a little bit silenced, or like they can't express their opinions, or like they can't push back or challenge. So I think Farhan mentioned the growth mindset. The way a growth mindset works best, in my opinion, is to surround yourself with people that are going to be consistently challenging your beliefs, but coming from a really good place in doing so. And what's the number one goal? Is to put Buster Posey in the best possible position to succeed, give him all the tools necessary to continue to develop, even though he's been one of the best players in the world. That doesn't mean that that development stops. And so in order to access that development, it's certainly not what I think makes the most sense or what Woe thinks makes the most sense, but what a collective group of staff members and coaches and players to some degree think makes the most sense. And I think that's how really good environments develop.
Hi, Gabe. Art Spander. I've been around the Bay Area for a lot of papers here. You managed the last 2 years in a ballpark with a lot of home runs. You're coming to a place where home runs are very rare. Is this going to be a change in your managing style, or how do you look at that?
This feels like a roster construction.
No, it's a question for the manager.
Look, like I think it makes some sense to play to your environment to some degree. Like I've thought a lot about Brandon Belt and specifically what he brings, how impressive it is to watch him take an at-bat. Independent of the outcome of the at-bat, he tends to look over pitches and make really good swing or don't swing decisions. And so I know that the power has dropped off a little bit, but taking the things that he does very, very well and highlighting some of those things might lead to some more of that power production. It might lead, and I mean, we're talking about ballpark construction and power production, so obviously there's going to be some changes in the ballpark, and that might really help our players. But specifically, I think it's about instilling confidence in players for the things that they do really well, and then reminding them how those positive steps forward can play in the environment that they play in, specifically here in San Francisco.
Hi, Carlos Ramirez, Telemundo 48 and NBC Bay Area. Now with the three of you in place, how do you plan to tackle free agency?
Scott?
I think I said last time I was sitting up here that was day 1.5. This is day 3.5 for me. But I will say that we're excited to have the three of us in place and to start having those conversations that Gabe referenced, that are full of debate, that are full of challenging each other, to make sure that we're targeting the right players and that Gabe feels comfortable deploying those players in the right way to allow them to succeed. Farhan and I are actually going to the GM meetings, and that's going to be the first opportunity to start talking about specific free agents that we're going to target and specific moves that we're going to target to make sure that we build the best roster we can possibly build for Gabe.
Gabe over here, Ryan Gorsey, San Francisco Examiner. Years ago, you and your then wife had a domestic violence prevention foundation. I was wondering what inspired the creation of it and what's become of it since.
Sure. So that was in the mid 2000s, and my then wife Lisa was a survivor of domestic violence. She had an abusive relationship in high school, and we saw an opportunity where we had acquired a platform as a Major League Baseball player in a city like Boston to really use that platform to do something good. We spoke at high schools together as in a partnership where we stood up next to each other. She told her story, and I played a supporting role. But then I think I successfully demonstrated that it was okay for the men in the audience to be vulnerable and to really understand the differences between what is perceived strength and what is perceived weakness. And specifically, I wanted to demonstrate, because I had, at that time, I had a physical stature, and I wanted to demonstrate that I could be vulnerable and I could be a listener and I could play a supportive role. And I think we did that together at high schools in Boston. Additionally, we improved conditions in shelters, in domestic violence shelters in Southern California, and specifically, we hired staff to educate, parenting courses, and help people become better in relationships. We improved conditions physically with play structures, and we did everything that we possibly could to create a better platform for the people who were in those shelters to enter back into society when they left more successful and with a more supportive system than when they came in. We hired full-time staff who I stay in contact with to this day. My mom ran the day-to-day operations of the foundation, and we ran out of bandwidth, but we poured a tremendous amount of time, money, and resources into that foundation, and it's one of the things that I'm most proud of in my life.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.